Hi, I'm Stephen Hassan, and I am absolutely delighted to have as my guest today Robert Boyle-Laisure, who is a law professor at St. John's University, a university that I literally grew up across the street from in Flushing, Queens, New York. And Robin, we've been talking with each other for a while now, but we got to meet at a cult conference in Manchester, England, of ICSA, the International Cultic Studies Association, and and you've written some really terrific, wonderfully important articles on the whole issue of undue influence and cults, which is my area of my dissertation research, my doctoral research, and I'm just thrilled to be part of the community of experts and professionals who really want justice and want to help move the ball down the road further to help people understand that unethical mental manipulation, mind control, social influence is a problem and needs to be addressed. And with that, I would like to say, tell us how you got interested in this weird subject. People know I was in the Moonies and got out 44 years ago, but how did you come to this?
Right. And well, thank you very much for having me. And it's always a pleasure seeing you. And I know we got to sit down and talk in Manchester, but I feel as if I've known you before that. And it may be from the videos or just chance passing by at different conferences. But I remember really getting into the some of your conference videos that I've used in my writings and watching those conference panels and really studying them. So that was really very fortunate to find that. I got involved in this. A law school classmate said to me that Herb Rosedale is the partner that she works for in her large law firm, and he's someone I should meet, and I would really have something in common with him. And I sat down and met him, and he said, once you get involved in this stuff, you're never going to be able to let it go. And this was, I remember the meeting very clearly. It was, my kids are now 21, and I found out later that day I was pregnant. So it was a good
Wow.
21 some odd years ago. And we sat down and had lunch together, and it was really kind of a life-changing event, because after that, I went to the AFF conferences, which became ICSA. And so I was getting involved pretty much when it was shifting over from AFF to ICSA.
Yep. If I can
Um,
interrupt you and just say that Herb Rosedale lived in the town near the Moonies, and when they were buying property and such, that's how that they were wanting to change zoning board regulations, and it was his initial introduction. And he was just such a righteous, caring human being, and he helped me so many times with legal issues, with cults threatening me and everything else, and he's truly missed. But anyway, he just played a very important role in terms of moving the cult awareness and education field with professionals, including lawyers and mental health people. So back to
and
you.
very generous with his time. He was a
Very
partner at
generous.
this large law firm, and we would say, how does he have time for all of the work that I'm sure they're putting on his shoulders? And he did so much for AF, American Family Foundation, and then International Cultic Studies Association. So he invited me to get involved. And the reason why our mutual friend, my law school classmate, and the associate who worked for him, the reason why she put us together was because she was aware that when I was in college, I was approached by one individual in particular, but also others who were really very, in some ways, had good intentions
Hmm.
of getting involved in political activism, but it also took a very manipulative turn.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt very much manipulated, I guess, to put a word on it. At the time, I wasn't aware of that, and I was really gung-ho and all involved and very committed, and felt as if what I was doing was so important. And it wasn't until much later that I realized how I really didn't have critical thinking skills in gear, and that I was very much kind of under their influence. And one person in particular, but so it took a couple of years for me to really get that sorted out, to get away, to move away, and to start a new life, which is what I did. I came down to Manhattan and started a new life. I went to law school where I met this mutual friend, and she was the one who introduced me to Herb. And so once I got him, I started talking to Herb. Herb would say to me, you know, for someone who hadn't joined a group like the Moonies, you certainly have a lot of awareness and understanding. And he would kind of leave it on the table for me to say something, and I wasn't yet ready to really say anything, and I would just nod. And he invited me to speak at one of the conference luncheons, which might have been the first ICSA conference, I believe. And I went and I spoke at the luncheon on women as victims and the Violence Against Women Act and stalking. And I talked about that and how current laws could be used to protect victims of cults. And I wrote an article for the then journal, and of what it was called that ICSA was producing. And then I wrote another piece after that on, as I said, I was writing on Violence Against Women Act. I was writing about anti-stalking. And I had a really interesting interview with a young man, and I was interviewing him about emancipation laws and how those could be used. He actually had left the cult he was living in Midtown Manhattan. He left his mother and I believe a sibling, and at a young age was able to emancipate himself, to extricate himself from the cult and to get an education and to move on with his life. I wrote about that. I thought that was really interesting. So at the time I was interested in the current laws, using the current laws to help people escape from cults and move on with their lives. And then more recently, I looked into human trafficking, which was coincidentally about the same time that I came upon your video where you were on a panel and talking about the same type of use of this statute for that purpose. And so I wrote an article about how these human trafficking statutes can be used to prosecute cult leaders. And that one landed in a law review journal published by Oregon International Law Review. So that was published there, and I was very enthused then to see the case against United States versus Raniere.
Yes.
Against NXIVM.
And I'm looking over your head, and I see Sarah Edmondson's book. Scarred, who was a victim of Keith Raniere and NXIVM.
Yes. So her book is really well done, and it tells a really honest story. It seems like a very honest story, very moving story. And what I got out of it was, because a lot of it I had read about the facts of the organization, but what I got out of it was how she was really pulled into it and how she wanted to please her friends and really move on with her career and try to get centered. And it just seemed like the real honest, earnest account. And I really well done. So I wrote a short 1-page review for that, which hopefully will come out in the next inaugural issue for the journal for ICSA.
Good.
The new version of it. And what else can I tell you? So the NXIVM case was really fascinating, and we're all standing by waiting for sentencing to happen.
Yes.
But I attended some of the trial and listened to the testimony. It was really amazing that the prosecutors were able to put together that much information, because there was just a ton of information that they could cull through. They had a lot of records, a lot of years in the organization, a lot of people involved, and they put on really a wonderful case, a very solid case.
Just to say for those who are listening to this that Keith Raniere was found guilty on 7 counts. Yes. Involving trafficking and involuntary servitude. And it really was a fruition of your article for saying, we can really use trafficking laws to go after cult leaders. And as my understanding is, the trial didn't talk about cults and didn't explicitly talk about mind control or brainwashing.
No.
But through the testimony and the cross-examinations and the direct examinations, all of the behaviors were fleshed out, and the judge and jury found guilty, and he remains in jail.
That's right. So it was pretty clear from the testimony that they were duped, that they felt as if they were doing good. They felt, for those who were recruiting people into the organization, felt they were doing something meaningful. And it wasn't until much later, and I also think that the organization changed over time to be darker, more sinister, more violent.
I think it was sinister from the beginning. I mean, Keith Raniere, got into trouble because he was running a multi-level marketing cult that was scamming people, and he had exaggerated his biography and made up all kinds of accolades that he should never have. And as soon as he got involved with Saltzman, she was an expert in neuro-linguistic programming, which is a thing that I know about. It was covert hypnotic methodology from the psychiatrist Milton Erickson. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you, but I think it was dark. It got worse, and certainly at the point that they were branding women like Sarah without anesthesia, naked on a table being held down and recording it. It was absolutely disgusting.
Mm-hmm. So that, and then they had ordered a cage that they were going to put these women in, and they had ordered other things that were in the process of being delivered. So I think the feds came in at just, a bit late, but because it took them a few years from the time they were informed to the time they actually acted, but they did put together a good case. So
yeah, absolutely. And Catherine Oxenberg, because her daughter was in the cult, played a big role putting political pressure and uncovering the corruption with police that were covering up for Raniere, and a lot of dirty stuff, just a lot of dirt. But it was a trafficking group. It really was. And I just want to remark one more thing and say that this could happen because it wasn't a religion. This was a coaching, transformational, cult. And so we didn't have to jump over those hurdles of what if, he was a messenger of God and this was all a religious thing. That made it hard.
That's because the First Amendment is sometimes a shield in these extreme cases, these extreme religions. So I've been really fascinated by that, and I was very pleased to see that that came about. And what I'm also been focusing on is undue influence, and we share that in common, that interest. And I know there are a few models out there as to how to help victims with undue influence. The theory really came about, as you know, from really contesting wills. So it was never devised to be used in the way in which we think it could be used. You and I talked about different statutes that could address this. And we talked briefly about California. California has some interesting statutes, and one of them is about undue influence. It says a conservator of the estate may be appointed for a person who is substantially unable to manage his or her own financial resources or resist fraud or undue influence. So the difficulty that I'm having, and I'm glad we're having this conversation, the difficulty that I have with the theory on undue influence is it always seems based on a weak mind. And that's difficult to prove, right? It's difficult to prove when back in the day when brainwashing was the theory and courts didn't always buy brainwashing. Right. And I think, honestly, the theory should more turn on, well, what were the bad acts that occurred, right?
Agreed.
Let's look at the perpetrators.
Exactly.
And what did they do wrong, as opposed to let's look at the victim to see how weak is that person's mind.
Completely agree with you. In fact, when I spoke with the forensic psychiatrist Bennett Blum, who came up with his own model called Ideal, based on Margaret Singer's work, he advised me, he said, the focus has to be on the predator and what the predator did, and not on the victim.
Right.
Now, Shefflin, who I know you know, Alan Shefflin, law professor emeritus, has a social influence model that I'm writing about in my thesis, and he thinks it should be a framework that incorporates whatever unique vulnerabilities were in the influencee, as well as the predator or predatory organization, and the techniques of influence, including Lifton and Singer and my bite model, but also the consequences, the motivation, etc. So a more holistic, systemic type of thing. But I just want to also add that social psychology has identified one of the most common errors. It's called the fundamental attribution error. And what that says is that when people are trying to understand other human beings, they have this bias to overestimate dispositional variables or personality variables and underestimate this social influence context or the people who are influencing them. In other words, we all carry this bias of blaming the victim. They were weak, they were stupid, they were this, they were that. In my case, I wasn't weak and I wasn't stupid, but I was uneducated about how undue influence works. And, so I was uneducated as a good consumer about undue influence and how it's performed. I was vulnerable because my girlfriend dumped me and women were flirting with me, and I thought I might get lucky, as a 19-year-old male who is healthy. But deception and the lack of informed consent is a critical variable that the public still doesn't understand. And nobody says, you know what, I want to be abused and exploited.
Right.
You know, let me be separated from my family, friends, loved ones, my education, all the things that I hold dear, and let me work like a slave for no money in order to take care of, you know.
But it's interesting. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the A&E channel has some interesting programming going on, and so there's a series right now on the A&E channel on extreme religions, cults and extreme religions.
I think I've seen it. I think they use combating cult mind control in one of them, actually.
Well, the interesting thing is in many of these different segments, they took NXIVM and the different groups.
Right.
There's this belief that you're doing good, right? And I think when people really believe that they're making the world better, achieving something that nobody else can achieve, when it's that overarching, it becomes so powerful that then they overlook all of the gritty stuff.
Oh yeah, no, the fantasy of either improving yourself to some great extent, transforming yourself, like in Scientology, you can move objects with your mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible technology. Or making the world a better place, ending crime, ending poverty, saving pedophile dominated children who've been trafficked. So that's the fantasy, that's the lure that gets intelligent, educated people to buy in and say, "Hey, there's something valuable here."
Right. And and then also if you look at extreme religions, they're also thinking about how their religion is superior to others, but they're also closer to God. So they're thinking along the lines of this is really getting them somewhere, but also allowing everybody around me to get into heaven. You know, it's this
Right.
communal where we're making things better for the world.
Right. But as you know so well, mind control or undue influence comes in many different contexts, not just religious cults, but could be political cults, therapy cults, multi-level marketing cults, trafficking is a commercial cult, large group awareness training cults, and cults of personality, where there can be one controlling person exploiting and abusing another.
Okay. Much like
So
the book you wrote about.
exactly. So the construct needs to get out of the religious frame into in my opinion, and yours, I believe too, human rights frame.
Mm-hmm.
Like that people are being harmed, that their basic liberties are being intruded upon
Mm-hmm.
by these predators. And my friend Frederick Clarkson made this point to me that I'll share, which is, the Moonies claim religious freedom. We're free to believe Moon is the Messiah. But at the point that these women were recruiting me and lying to me, they were infringing on my religious freedom as a Jew. My religious freedom to be part of my community and my faith tradition was infringed on, and that's not right.
That's not right. Yeah. The so the other thing that's of concern to me is the how some of these groups are getting weapons and training young ones to use weapons and training their members to be armed. And I think that's of concern.
Of course.
And there's with such a strong lobby right now in the United States, so many people are permitted to own guns. It's legal in many states for people to have these weapons and to be training with them. But this is of concern to
Yeah,
me.
not just handguns. We're talking about
No.
assault rifles,
Yes.
right? And I guess I want to mention Joseph Kony, who's this had the Lord's Resistance Army, if I'm remembering correctly. He would, in Africa would go into to villages and corral the children, make them murder their own family, and recruit them to become child soldiers.
Right. And
That's not right.
that's not right. Um, so those are things that I think we have to be aware of, is the use of weapons in
Yeah.
some of these groups.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a few questions if I
Sure.
may pick your brain. So one debate that I've had at my forensic think tank at Harvard Medical School um, is the term undue influence and how it has been come to be known under testamentary competency or capacity. And there are some purists who are like, you can't change the definition because this
I
is.
met them, Steve.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. Forgive me. You gave us talk for us. Thank you. Yeah, and so make up another term, coercive control or some other term. So talk about words and what you think. Because I'm at this point, I'm feeling like undue influence is 500 years old, and and when I Google the term, I have actually Google alerts now for undue influence. There are like 5.5 million things, and every 2 days I get 6 or 8 articles that use the term undue influence in it. So I'm
Right.
leaning towards that term again.
See, my feeling is you could take any phrase and change how it means. I think you can take undue influence and change how we look at undue influence. It's just like you take a statute that's on the books for 100 years. You can change it, right? So I think these terms can be changed, just in terms of how we look at it. Coercive control is also, it brings to mind the law in the UK, right?
Exactly.
And they seem successful there in bringing prosecutions, which is terrific. That could also be used, I would think, if we were to try to bring in a more wider range in remedies
Yeah.
in the US. I don't know how successful we would be here in the US.
Yeah, I don't know about the term coercive because a lot of mind control is not overt coercion. It's more subtle and sophisticated.
Right,
That's why I'm leaning away from that term. And then there's this group in New Jersey that you write about in your new
right.
forthcoming to be published article, predatory alienation,
Hmm.
which is a very interesting new term.
It is, and that's an extensive piece of legislation, and anything that is, that much thought has gone into it, it means it will get that much more resistance, unfortunately. So I think, and everyone agrees it's not perfect, but I also think we just need to keep looking at the current laws and seeing if we could tweak the current laws. And there's nothing wrong with the New Jersey legislation that's pending in terms of, let's just get it to the House floor, debate it, discuss it, keep it moving, keep it going,
Yeah.
um, have it move forward. It might save some people. So I think all of these approaches I'm in support of. I don't think there's any one approach that would work.
So if you were speaking to a group of judges
Hmm.
on the topic of undue influence, cults, mind control, what do you think would be the key points you'd want to make sure you cover?
That's really a good point. I think that it's to keep an open mind because the facts of every case are going to differ. So there are those close cases where it's real hard call whether the person is a victim or a perpetrator. Is the person being victimized, or was the person a trafficker, right? Or perhaps both. And so where does justice fall for that individual? Just
Mhm.
like within NXIVM, there are those who were close to Raniere and carrying out the things that he wanted them to do for him. Are they good guy or bad guy, right?
Well,
Do
Allison Mack, for
Allison
example,
Mack,
explicitly, she was an actress and she would never, I don't think, been involved with branding women by their genitals had she not gotten under the spell of Keith Raniere and his hypnosis. But that I'm looking at it from the outside looking in.
and me
But
too. And
but
that's the close call. And that's where the facts will make a difference. And so my advice to judges would be try to keep an open mind because every case is going to be different. And then where justice falls is going to change depending upon the witness and the case. So the Allison Mack is a perfect example of should she be sentenced or pardoned? It's hard to tell. Um,
well, I think she's guilty.
mhm.
But the question is, does she now understand what happened to her? Is she repentant? Has she is she interested in making amends to all the people that she's harmed? If she
And
isn't, then it's harder to argue that there should be some sense of leniency, you know?
and also, but and looking back at what kind of role were these folks playing in this operation? Um, were they truly manipulating people, knowing what that they were getting them recruited into something that was evil, which was the word I heard in court that the one of the times that I was there, this truly evil organization, or were they duped and just thinking they were bringing people in for good reason?
So I subscribe to the dissociative model that there's your real self and then the cult program self, and the cult program self is doing all of the cult indoctrinated beliefs and behaviors. But who was the person before this part got created and indoctrinated? And again, it is, every case has to be decided differently. But if she held somebody down while they were branded, she held somebody down, or if she talked someone into coming to the place without telling them what was going to happen, she's guilty. The
Mhm.
question is in the sentencing, and what's just.
Right.
Because for me, and right now in the Boston Globe, Tsarnaev is in the news because a judge has decided that there was a
Mhm.
bias in his jurors and he didn't get a fair trial. Therefore, the death penalty decision needed to be revisited. And should there be another trial, and the pros and cons of that? And I wrote about right after it happened, it appeared to me because he was like a wrestling undergrad who liked women and smoked pot until he
That
got
that
radical.
represents a lot of people.
Right, and then he got radicalized and did these terrible things. My question is, okay, he's guilty. He killed people and maimed people and harmed people. But are we serving justice to have him killed? Would justice not be better if he is in fact repentant? Wouldn't it be better for him to be messaging to other people not to do what happened to him and harm people and regret it for the rest of your life?
Mhm.
For me, that's more, or somebody, writing a book about it that gets vetted and the profits go to the victims or the victim's family. To me, that feels more like justice than
Right.
just incarcerating someone and trying to say, finished.
And well, there's plenty of literature that says that the death penalty, first of all, is so expensive. It doesn't save the state any money with all of the appeals.
Right.
And it says something very brutal, I think, about our society.
Yeah,
And
most other civil, countries have abolished the death penalty a long time ago.
mhm.
America is one of the other people. I want to ask you to comment also on some of the other things that I read in your recent journal article, some other angles that you're exploring. Would you share a little bit?
Okay, so there's one of the areas that I'm exploring that I haven't talked very much about, is the asylum statutes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've been researching that this summer, and I'm putting in an article together about that because there's this phrase: in order for an undocumented immigrant to be able to get asylum status, they need to claim a particular ground.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, of course, kind of layer upon layer of what someone has to do. But if they claim that they were escaping a particular social group
Like
from
a
the
gang.
country of origin, a gang, or even a cult,
Mm-hmm.
or extreme religion of some sort, it's very hard for them to establish the asylum here in the US. And in fact, there's a split in authorities in our federal courts. Most of our federal courts are just really like working very hard with those few words in the statute. And by their machinations with these few words,
Right.
these applicants are always denied their
Mm-hmm.
asylum status. So they end up having to go back to the same countries where, even if they've made a good case that if they go back, they will be attacked, their families will be attacked. And so that's what I'm writing about right now, is this, what to do about that. Why we have such a hard time wrestling with the asylum statute language, the federal language, how we can resolve the split in the circuits that's already there,
Mm-hmm.
but also the bigger question of what to do with these people who come here are looking for a safe place,
Right.
and yet they don't get a safe place.
Right.
And they're sent right back to where they began. So that's what I'm writing about.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well. Um,
And it relates to cults, because some of them are escaping cults and gangs.
mm-hmm.
Um, and some of them joined those organizations. Others left those countries because they were avoiding membership.
Mm-hmm.
But whether they joined or avoided membership, it doesn't seem to matter once they get here. They still go through the same process and end up sort of in a boomerang. They end up right back.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm looking at now.
Mm-hmm. So you write in your article what I'm including in my dissertation, Alan Shefflin's social influence model.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that? Or do you think that they could be improved upon or
I think it's a really good model, and I'm hopeful. The question is whether a court would want to embrace. I don't know how willing courts are going to be to embrace a large model, or whether they would want something much more simpler, to work with. But I also think that any kind of model, the Bite model, the Alan Shefflin's model, I think it's all important to move it out there in the literature, to get these articles printed, to inform, to do public speaking where there are other lawyers and judges to be talking about this, because we might not have the right model, but as long as we're talking about it, as long as we're getting this message out there that there are a lot of victims who need help, that they might not have the right tools, their lawyers might not have the right
Right.
theories, but as long as I think lawmakers are aware of the problem, I think that's a really good step in the right direction.
And in your research, have you come across parental alienation?
Yes, I have. And I had written a very tiny book review on grandparents' rights a while ago. That's also another interesting area, and one that could be manipulated, right, from both sides. So you have to be a little bit careful on how the theory is spun out, because it could be used for what we would consider the wrong purposes. But
Well, let me just interrupt and say for those listening, parental alienation is where parents are divorcing and one is accused of brainwashing the children to distrust the other parent or to isolate the children from the other parent getting access.
right.
So it's more of a family frame of social influence, and it can get really extreme where children accuse the other parent of sexual abuse when nothing ever happens, or physical abuse when nothing ever happened. And in talking with some former Jehovah's Witnesses, apparently they were even coaching people. If somebody left the Watchtower Society, there would be a whole legal team strategy for how to keep the kids in the cult
Mm-hmm.
and make up things against the disbelieving parent that's been, disfellowshipped.
And so I think with all of these theories, that there may be some benefit to them, but you also have to be careful that they could be twisted and used for an illicit purpose also. And that's why, for instance, the New Jersey Safe and Sound bill, their predatory alienation bill, could be useful, but I've also heard that it could be counterproductive if it's in the wrong hands. So I think that what has to happen is just education with our lawmakers, that they're understanding the complexity of these issues, and that we just hope that they're applying these laws correctly, the way they should be applied.
So one of the things that I've noticed over my 4 decades activism on this field is just a much bigger awareness of social psychology and techniques of how to subvert people from making good decisions in their own best interest. I've seen an increased exposure, especially through the internet, of hypnosis and manipulation techniques to alter people's consciousness and to sidestep critical thinking, as well as just plain documentaries, like you said, on A&E about cults, and
Mm-hmm.
specials on NXIVM. I believe HBO has one coming out on
Mm-hmm.
NXIVM
Mm-hmm.
and such. I just think it creates more awareness in the general public. And one of the things I've been, trying to encourage is have more former members speaking up and just sharing their own personal experience in their own circles. If they don't want to be on social media, fine. But just explaining that it's not stupid people and that the mind is influenceable. Like, that's one of the good things about being a human being. We like to learn, we like to grow, and we adapt to different environments. And if you can capture somebody's attention, and right now a lot's happening online where people aren't even physically with other people. I'm seeing people getting radicalized just from watching YouTubes and going to discussion boards and digitally online.
Mhm.
And so I'm hoping that there will be a tipping point where the vast majority go, of course, people can be manipulated to believe crazy things. And, there's hope because people can wake up and, realize this is wrong and move on with their lives as well.
And I'm hoping that my daughter had done her gold award on a project called Staying Safe. And she did community education, speaking to groups, Girl Scouts, and schools, and different age groups about manipulation. And it would be, I hope that there's more of those kinds of education forums because young people need to be aware that if something doesn't feel right, if someone doesn't sound right, just that self-awareness and critical thinking skills are so important. And young people leaving home or even when they're in high school can be easily manipulated, but also those who go off to college, they're out of the house, um, and they can be so easily approached. And like the woman you had on the panel who was in the modeling agency.
Rachel Thomas, right.
Yes.
She was recruited by a pimp who was supposedly a modeling agent,
Mhm.
and we went on to develop Ending the Game, which is the first and only program that helps young women understand pimp or traffic or mind control techniques used on them to enslave them. Um, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and knowledge is power, and just understanding and having humility that you're not invulnerable to this. And also, I think building a network of trust with family or friends, that if something comes your way and you're not sure about it, that you reality test it with other people. And if somebody enters your life, even if you think that they're the love of your life, it's like maybe they are, but maybe they're not. And go slow and do your research on their background, like meet their family, meet their childhood friends, see
Mhm.
whether or not they're being honest with you, etc. And just again, I don't want to make people paranoid or afraid of new people or new ideas, but there's a lot of crazy beliefs going on right now. We see QAnon and all kinds of
Mhm.
other really off the wall conspiracy theories, and it's all part of what I have written about as psyops, aimed at just confusing people and disorienting them, making them afraid so they'd be more likely to follow an authoritarian voice that
Mhm.
tells them, trust me, I know what I'm doing, etc. It's like, if something is true, it will stand up to scrutiny. If someone's really a good person, they won't mind you asking direct questions and you
Mhm.
demanding direct answers.
And I think for families who have lost a loved one to a controlling individual or group, just to let that loved one know that you're there for them
Yeah, I'm for
is important.
more strategic interactions, to just stay in touch with them and ask good questions, but not attacking, not confronting, but
Mhm.
just encouraging the person to be in touch with their own values, their own resources, and to learn about other groups or situations that are undue influence ones.
Mhm.
Because I believe people want to be free and they don't want to be abused or
Right.
exploited.
And some of them just don't know where to land or how to get there. So I think that family and friends, if they could try to be non-judgmental and to let that loved one know that they're available.
Yep. Yeah, and that they're loved and that they're
Mhm.
valued and that there's a future. Because part of mind control is the phobia indoctrination that if you leave, only bad things will happen to you or your family or friends or the planet. And to open the doors by explaining what a phobia is and how other groups put phobias in people's minds to contrul them. Because
Mhm.
it's always easier to see it over there in another
Right. Than to see
situation.
it where you are.
Once you can see it over there, you go, it's like kind of like my situation. Then the door opens. Well, thank you so much
Oh,
for,
well, thank you very much for having me.
oh, absolutely. Continued success. Let's stay in touch. And yeah, I think you're right. More education, just doing more, putting out more and more journal articles, teaching the teachers, and you have law students, and hopefully they'll be influenced by your good work as well, Robin. Thank you
Well,
so much.
thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.